Bikers surrounded a black old man's house, but what happened next shocked the entire town. For as long as anyone could remember, the quaint town of Fletcher's Grove had been peaceful, almost sleepy, until a shocking incident shattered its quiet routine. At the end of a narrow dirt road stood the modest, weathered home of an elderly black man named Moses Tate. One summer evening, a swarm of roaring motorcycles thundered into town and surrounded Moses's old wooden porch. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, hearts pounding as they wondered why these bikers had come. Had Moses angered them? Were they here for vengeance? Nobody could have predicted what would happen next, or how the entire town would soon be changed forever. Moses Tate was no stranger to adversity. At 74 years old, he had weathered his share of storms, both literal and metaphorical. The small house he'd inherited from his parents had withstood hurricanes, torrential rains, and the sorrow of losing loved ones. It was a place of remembrance. The scuffed floorboards still bore marks from the footsteps of relatives long gone. Family portraits from the 1950s and 60s lined the walls, silently testifying to generations of Tates who had called this patch of land home. Everyone in Fletcher's Grove knew Moses. He was the town's unofficial historian, a walking memory bank who could recount each family's lineage going back decades. He could tell stories of the night doctor Martin Luther King Jr. spoke in a nearby church, or how the first paved road changed the farmland here forever. Year after year, folks who never bothered to visit the local library would stop on Moses's porch for a listen, entranced by his gentle voice and wealth of knowledge. The day before the bikers arrived, Moses had been sitting in his rocking chair at twilight, humming an old Sam Cooke song while sipping mint tea. A storm was rolling in, and he watched the sky bruise purple. As lightning illuminated the horizon, he felt uneasy, as though something was shifting in the wind. He whispered a prayer for calm and went inside to lock up for the night. Meanwhile, across town, in the parking lot of the local bar called Rusty's Watering Hole, a band of bikers had rolled in. They were led by a towering man named Colt Crusher Henderson. With a rigid stare, shaved head, and muscular arms decorated with tattoos, Crusher's reputation was as menacing as his appearance. People in Fletcher's Grove rarely interacted with this group, but they recognized the roar of Harley-Davidson engines and the thunderous presence that always accompanied them. That evening, the bartender overheard the bikers talking about an old man's house on the outskirts of town. The conversation was peppered with hushed, tense phrases. She caught glimpses of words like inheritance, land deed, and payback, but when she tried to listen closer, the bikers went quiet. Sensing danger, she muttered an excuse and hurried into the back room to call her boyfriend. Everyone had seen enough true crime shows to realize something ominous might be brewing. By the time dawn arrived, rumors had begun swirling through Fletcher's Grove. The postman mentioned seeing a row of shiny motorcycles parked outside a cheap motel by the highway. The local mechanic said the bikers had come by his shop, asking for directions to Moses Tate's property. With each retelling, the story grew more sinister, fueled by a mixture of fear and fascination. Nobody seemed to know the exact reason these bikers were interested in Moses or what they planned to do. At around 3 in the afternoon, Crusher and his men rolled up Moses's dirt driveway, motors snarling. Dust choked the air. A handful of curious neighbors peeked from distant windows. Moses himself was perched on his porch, reading the local newspaper. The second he heard the engines, his heart thumped in his chest. He placed the paper on his lap and stood slowly, determined to face whatever was coming. One by one, the bikers dismounted. Leather jackets bearing a stylized skull emblem gleamed in the sunlight. Their presence was oppressive, like a dark cloud blocking out the sun. Crusher, stepping forward, towered over Moses. For a moment, All that could be heard was the idle ticking of engine heat dissipating. "Mr. Tate?" Crusher asked, voice gravelly and low. Moses nodded, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. "Yes, son, that's me. Can I help you?" Crusher didn't respond right away, but instead pointed to the land around them, the parched grass, the old oak trees swaying in the breeze. "We heard a story about some land that might not belong to you," he finally said, each word dripping with threat. "We're here to settle a debt." Moses frowned, confusion washing over him. "I don't have any debts that I know of. My family's owned this place for generations." "That's not the story we heard," said one of the other bikers, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek. "We've got sources that say otherwise." Moses felt his heart sink. Could it be a simple misunderstanding? Or something far worse? He remained calm, drawing on years of wisdom. "Son, I'm not sure who told you that, but I assure you this land has been in my family longer than you can imagine." Crusher glanced at his companions, then leaned in toward Moses. "We're going to stay in town for a bit," he said. "We'll be back. If there's a real debt to settle, we'll collect." One way or another, as the bikes roared away, Moses exhaled a trembling breath. He had no idea what kind of trouble was about to be unleashed on his doorstep, but he could sense that his quiet, unassuming life was about to erupt into chaos. The neighbors, too frightened to approach, disappeared behind closed doors. By sunset, the entire town knew Moses Tate had become the unlikely target of a dangerous group. Nobody dared to intervene yet, not until they had answers. And somehow, those answers felt more elusive and more ominous than ever. The next morning, Fletcher's Grove awoke under a blanket of unease. People headed to work, children went to school, and shops opened like any normal day. Yet underneath the routine was a ripple of tension. Everyone knew about the bikers. Everyone wondered what they really wanted. Many whispered that Moses was in danger. Others speculated that the so-called debt might be connected to some old land dispute. Some folks, in hushed conversations, suggested that the bikers might be vigilantes, though no one could pin down exactly why or for whom they'd be seeking vengeance. Despite his anxiety, Moses decided he couldn't hide in his house. At sunrise, he headed into town in his battered pickup truck, determined to continue with his usual routine. First, he visited the local grocery, a small shop run by Mrs. Myrtle Evans, who'd known him since she was a girl. As soon as Moses walked in, she closed the door behind him and flipped the sign to closed. "Don't want any unexpected visitors," she whispered, eyes wide with worry. "Are you all right, Moses?" "You need help?" "I appreciate your concern, Myrtle," he replied quietly. "But I'm fine. Just want to pick up a few things. Milk, bread, some vegetables." She nodded, leading him to the aisle. But as she gathered his groceries, she kept glancing out the window. "I heard those men are still in town. They're at the motel off Highway 19. Moses bit his lip. The memory of Crusher's cold stare made his stomach tighten. "I heard the same. I plan to talk to Sheriff Parker. Maybe he can straighten this out." After leaving the grocery store, Moses drove over to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Walter Parker was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with a calm demeanor that had earned him respect all around Fletcher's Grove. When Moses entered, Parker was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. He held up a finger, indicating for Moses to wait. "Yes, I know," Parker said into the receiver. "I'll keep you posted. But we don't have enough to go on just yet." "Yes, I understand. All right, goodbye." He hung up, then turned his full attention to Moses. "I assume you're here about those bikers." Moses nodded. "They showed up at my place yesterday, claiming I owed them some debt. I have no idea what they're talking about." Parker leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Word around town is they might be connected to a bigger criminal outfit, but so far, no direct evidence." "What exactly did they say to you?" Moses recounted the brief conversation. Parker listened carefully, jotting down a few notes. When he finished, the sheriff exhaled slowly. "They haven't broken any laws yet, but I don't like them targeting you. I'd advise you to keep your doors locked, and if they show up again, call me immediately. I'll do what I can within the bounds of the law." Unease fluttered in Moses's chest. "Thanks, Sheriff. I appreciate it." As Moses headed home, the dusty road seemed longer and quieter than usual. A sense of watchfulness crept through the trees, as though every rustling leaf concealed a hidden threat. When he finally pulled up to his house, he noticed fresh tire marks on the dirt path. They weren't from his pickup. Could the bikers have returned while he was away? He parked and carefully scanned the area. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss. Then he noticed a piece of paper pinned to his front door with a knife. Heart pounding, Moses approached the door. The knife was large, the kind used for hunting, its blade glinting in the afternoon sun. He swallowed hard, reaching to pluck the note from its impromptu holder. The message was simple and chilling. "We know the truth. Pay what's owed, or else." Moses's hands shook as he pulled the knife out. This was no harmless prank. Someone wanted him terrified, wanted him to believe he was in the wrong. But the question still burned. Wrong about what? He went inside and locked the door, double-checking the windows. The house felt even smaller now, the walls seeming to close in on him. Memories of his father, who had built these very walls, whispered in the back of Moses's mind. This land was his birthright, a priceless legacy. To have it threatened by strangers made his blood boil. He paced the living room, uncertain what to do next. Later that evening, Moses decided to call his nephew, Samuel Tate, who lived in Memphis. Samuel was a paralegal with aspirations of becoming a civil rights attorney. If anyone knew how to handle a legal dispute, it was Samuel. After 3 rings, his nephew's cheerful voice answered, "Uncle Moses, how are you?" Moses tried to keep his tone calm, but worry crept in. "I've been better, son. I need some advice," he explained the situation, going over every detail he could remember. Samuel was silent for a long moment. "That's bizarre, Uncle. I know you've always had the deed to that house. I can look into county records and see if there's anything amiss. Could be someone forged documents, or maybe there's an old claim on the property. Let me handle this, okay?" Moses felt a wave of relief. "Thank you, Samuel. Anything you find, let me know. I'd hate for something bad to happen before we can straighten this out legally." When he hung up, Moses glanced at the windows again, half expecting headlights to appear in his driveway. The silence outside felt like the hush before a storm, and he wondered if the bikers believed this land didn't belong to him, who fed them that lie and why. Before turning in for the night, Moses got down on his knees, the old floor creaking beneath him. He prayed for protection, for guidance, and for the strength not to let fear consume him. Outside, the wind howled, shaking the branches of the ancient oak trees. Somewhere out there, those bikers lurked ready to pounce, to steal his peace, to strip him of his legacy. Yet deep in his heart, Moses sensed a larger plan at work. He just hoped, when everything finally came to light, that justice would prevail. Across town, at the Edgewood Motel, the bikers set up a temporary base. They occupied 5 rooms in a row, the neon sign outside flickering ominously against the night sky. Inside the largest suite, Crusher sat at a rickety table, staring at a weathered envelope. He traced his thick fingers over the handwriting on its surface, a script that belonged to someone from his past. A younger biker named Dex entered the room, removing his helmet and smoothing his messy hair. "Boss, the guys are restless. They're wondering when we're going to make our move." Crusher didn't look up. "We move when I say we move. Tell them to keep an eye on that old man's house, discreetly. I don't want the law breathing down our necks yet. Dex nodded but hesitated. You really think that old man is hiding something? Crusher lifted his eyes, a cold determination burning in them. He's got to be. People don't just lie about land ownership for no reason. My contact was adamant we'd find proof. Dex frowned. Right. Our contact, still not sure we can trust them, though. We don't even know their full name. Crusher leaned forward, the legs of his chair scraping the floor. I've got my reasons for trusting them. Now get going. Once Dex left, Crusher opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph, an old black and white image of a young black man standing next to what looked like Moses's house. On the back, in spidery handwriting, it read, "This is our legacy." Crusher's jaw tensed. There was a name scrawled at the bottom, faded but still legible, Emmett Caldwell. Crusher felt a hot surge of anger. He remembered being told that his own family had been cheated out of property decades ago. Their name was Caldwell, and they hailed from nearby counties. He believed that Moses's family had swindled them somehow, though the details were murky. Crusher only had scraps of stories handed down through his father, who had died bitter and penniless. If claiming what was rightfully his meant confronting Moses, so be it. Family history demanded it. Meanwhile, back at Moses's house, a sleepless night dragged on. Moses couldn't help but watch every flicker of shadow. He sat by his window, dozing off in his armchair only to jerk awake at the smallest sound. Just after midnight, headlights flared at the edge of the driveway. The silhouette of a motorcycle stood against the moonlit sky before roaring off into the darkness. Moses clenched his teeth in fear and annoyance. They were toying with him, stoking his anxiety. Early the next morning, the phone rang, startling him awake. He stumbled to answer, heart pounding. It was Samuel. "Uncle Moses, I've done some digging," he said. "According to the county records, your deed is clear and uncontested. There's absolutely no sign of a legal challenge." Moses sighed in relief. "That's good news. However," Samuel continued, "there's something else. I referenced old land transactions from nearby areas. Back in 1958, a piece of property adjoining yours was sold under questionable circumstances. The owners were a family named Caldwell. There's no record of your family acquiring it, but there are rumors about a boundary dispute that was never resolved." Moses's pulse quickened. Caldwell. He tried to recall if his parents had ever mentioned that name. "Son, I don't remember anything about this." "Are you sure?" "As sure as the documents." "Still, it doesn't look like your family or you did anything illegal. If anything, the Caldwell sale was to a third party, some developer who never followed through on construction. Eventually, that land was abandoned, and the county took it back for unpaid taxes. It doesn't tie directly to your property." Moses rubbed his temples, feeling a headache bloom. "Then how do these bikers believe they have a claim on my house?" Samuel hesitated. "I can't say for sure, but if they're descendants of the Caldwell family, maybe they heard a twisted version of the story. Keep investigating, son. Something tells me this is deeper than it seems." Shortly after sunrise, Moses forced himself to live his day as normally as possible. He walked his property boundaries, stopping by the oak tree that his grandfather had planted. Memories washed over him like waves. He could almost hear the echoes of his father's stories, how they'd fought for this land, how proud they were to be homeowners in a time when that was rare for black families in the region. Generational pride was etched into every plank, every blade of grass. But those memories now felt threatened by the roar of engines. Late that afternoon, as Moses tidied up his front porch, a single rider appeared, a female biker, tall and lean, her face partly hidden by a bandana. She cut the engine and approached on foot, hands raised in a gesture of caution. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said, voice muffled by the bandana. She removed her helmet, revealing sharp features and eyes that flickered with intensity. Name's Trixie. Thought you should know, some of us don't agree with Crusher's methods. Moses tensed, not knowing whether to believe her. So why come here alone? She glanced around, making sure they weren't observed. Because there's something off about all this. Crusher's been obsessed with taking your land, but he won't give us the full story, only that your family cheated his. I did some digging of my own, and what you find? Trixie sighed. Honestly, not much. But I know a con when I see one. We're small time, sure, but we've never had problems like this until Crusher joined. Now, everything's about old grudges and family honor. Moses studied her, weighing her sincerity. So, are you a messenger, or are you here to help? She shifted on her feet. A bit of both. Look, you need to be careful. Crusher's determined. And a few of the others are stirring up trouble in town, looking for evidence you stole this land. I don't like it. Felt you should know. Moses nodded slowly. Well, I appreciate the warning, but if your group is so uncertain, why keep following him? She looked away, shame creeping over her features. Loyalty can be a twisted thing. We're in a tight spot. Some of us owe Crusher, others fear him. But I came to warn you because maybe there's a better way to resolve this before someone gets hurt. In that moment, Moses felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps not all of them were lost causes. Thank you, Trixie. If you really want to help, find out who's feeding him these lies. There has to be a root cause. Trixie nodded, then hurried back to her bike. She revved the engine and was gone, leaving only a swirl of dust behind. Moses watched her disappear down the road. He didn't know whether she was friend or foe, but her appearance signaled that the biker gang wasn't entirely of one mind. And in a conflict like this, that division could be the key to unraveling the truth. As the days passed, tensions in Fletcher's Grove escalated. The bikers grew more brazen, showing up at Rusty's watering hole every evening, drinking heavily, and occasionally starting fights with locals. Sheriff Parker found himself breaking up multiple altercations. Rumors flew that the gang was searching for any scrap of information about the Caldwell name and, by extension, Moses Tate. But no one knew precisely what they were looking for. Moses tried to keep his head high, but stress took its toll. His sleep was fitful, and he began forgetting simple tasks, like turning off the stove or locking his pickup truck. Concerned neighbors began to rally. Mrs. Myrtle Evans, the grocer, brought Moses homemade meals. The Blanchards next door installed motion sensor lights along the property line they shared with Moses, hoping to deter prowlers. Small gestures, but they reminded Moses he was not alone. Still, one evening, the tension broke. A group of 3 bikers, not including Crusher, arrived at Moses's house when he was out. They smashed a window, rummaged through the living room, and tore the place apart, looking for documents or valuables. By the time Moses returned, they were gone. The house was in shambles. His antique clock lay in pieces on the floor. The old family Bible was scattered, pages torn and tossed aside. Moses stood there, breathless, heartbreak turning to anger. He called Sheriff Parker, who arrived minutes later, lights flashing. As Parker examined the scene, he shook his head in disbelief. "They're brazen, I'll give them that," he muttered. "We'll dust for prints, see what we can find." Sorrow weighed heavily in Moses's chest. "They tore apart my father's Bible," he said, voice trembling. "They broke the clock I've had since I was a boy." Parker placed a comforting hand on Moses's shoulder. "We'll do our best to hold them accountable, but we need concrete evidence to make arrests." Moses looked out the broken window, anger simmering. "They won't stop until they find whatever they're looking for, or until they drive me out of here." "Well, I'm not leaving." The next day, while Moses was trying to tidy up what was left of his living room, he heard a knock at his door this time. It was a face he trusted. Pastor John Hathaway, a tall man with a gentle smile, had come to offer support. The local church had caught wind of Moses's troubles. and Pastor Hathaway wanted to help organize a town vigil or security patrol to keep watch at night. "These folks are preying on fear," the pastor said softly. "But if the community stands together, maybe we can dissuade them." Moses's eyes welled up with gratitude. "Thank you, Pastor. It means a lot." "I don't want to see anyone else get hurt on my account, though." The pastor shook his head. "We're all in this together, Moses. We won't abandon you." That same afternoon, Trixie reappeared, this time waiting for Moses at the edge of his porch. She removed her helmet with an air of urgency. "Crusher's furious. He wants to come here himself next time," she said in a rush. "Some of the guys broke in while he was out. Now he's paranoid you'll go to the feds or something." Moses raised an eyebrow. "Paranoid? He's the one terrorizing me." Trixie nodded, lips pressed tight. "I know. I found something, though something that might explain why he's so driven. He's got an old photograph of a man named Emmett Caldwell standing in front of a house that looks just like yours. It's dated 1957. Crusher claims that's his grandfather." Moses's mind raced. "My father bought this house from my grandfather in the early 50s. The Caldwell name never came up. Could they have been renters or neighbors? I just don't recall." "Crusher thinks your family tricked his grandfather out of the land," Trixie continued. "He won't show proof to the rest of us, though. Just keeps saying he has enough evidence to take back what's his. The rest of the gang is starting to doubt him, but fear can be powerful. Most of them will follow him anywhere unless we can show they're on the wrong side." Moses's stomach twisted. If that's what he believes, then this is about more than land. It's about vengeance. Trixie nodded grimly. "Exactly. I'll keep digging, but be careful. Crusher's planning something big." He mentioned a date this Saturday, said it'd be a day of reckoning. After she left, Moses collapsed into his rocking chair, mind whirling. Saturday was just a few days away. His house had already been vandalized. What worse harm could they inflict? Desperate for answers, Moses searched through his late father's old trunk, which was kept in the attic. Dust motes swirled in the beam of a single naked light bulb. Inside the trunk were yellowed letters, faded photographs, and deeds for the property. Hours passed as Moses painstakingly examined each item. Finally, he discovered an old letter addressed to his father. The return address belonged to Detroit Mercy Hospital, dated 1958. Moses read the letter, trying to piece together its significance. It was from a woman named Sarah Caldwell, who mentioned that her husband Emmett had fallen ill. The letter hinted at a financial arrangement she was making with Moses's father, something about medical bills and a second mortgage on land they owned. In the letter, Sarah begged for more time to pay back the loan, stating she was worried Emmett would lose his property. Then there was a cryptic line, "I know we risk losing our home, but your father assured us we could stay if we pay what we owe by the end of the year. Please don't take the land from us." Moses's eyes widened. He scanned further. Sarah wrote that she prayed the Tates would show mercy, that they had no intention of leaving but recognized they were behind on payments. It was a heartfelt plea. At the end, in his father's handwriting, was a note that read, "We'll see what we can do. No promises." So the Caldwell family had indeed occupied land adjacent or possibly overlapping Moses's property. They'd borrowed money from the Tates to cover medical bills. Judging by the letter, it seemed they failed to repay the debt and risked foreclosure. Moses frowned, feeling a surge of conflicting emotions. Could it be that Emmett Caldwell lost his home through a legal but morally questionable means? Determined to get the truth, Moses kept digging until he found an ancient property record from 1959. It named his father as the new owner of what had once been Emmett Caldwell's land. The last line read, "Under default of contract, property reverts to the Tate family." Moses's hands shook. He felt a deep sadness and a pang of guilt. His father might have been within his rights legally, but morally, that was a different story. If Crusher was Emmett Caldwell's grandson, then from his vantage point, the Tates might have seemed like villains who seized land from a desperate family. Armed with this new understanding, Moses realized he needed to stop Crusher before violence erupted. If the core issue was about restitution or an old wound that never healed, perhaps there was a peaceful path forward. He set the documents aside, then rubbed his tired eyes. Saturday was coming, and with it the promise of confrontation. But maybe, just maybe, truth and compassion could sway even the hardest of hearts, if only Moses could figure out how to reach Crusher in time. As the news of the impending showdown spread, Fletcher's Grove braced itself. The church organized prayer circles, and some citizens stood ready to defend Moses if necessary. Sheriff Parker increased patrols near Moses's house, though the county's meager budget limited how many deputies he could spare. Even so, Moses spent his nights jumping at every creak in the floor, every distant howl of the wind. On Thursday, 2 days before the reckoning, Moses gathered his courage and drove out to the Edgewood Motel. Despite the potential danger, he resolved to confront Crusher directly and propose a meeting. The ride was tense. His thoughts churned with visions of how the confrontation might end. When he arrived, he spotted the row of motorcycles. The midday sun glinted off their chrome frames. A few bikers lounged outside, smoking or tinkering with their bikes. The moment Moses stepped out of his truck, all eyes snapped to him, brimming with suspicion and aggression. Crusher emerged from a doorway, wearing his signature leather vest. He locked eyes with Moses and frowned. "You've got nerve showing up here, old man." Moses swallowed, drawing on every ounce of resolve. "We need to talk, face to face, man to man. We've been going at this the wrong way." Crusher let out a derisive snort. "The wrong way? My family lost everything to yours. You expecting me to just forgive and forget?" Moses held up the documents he'd found. "This might tell a different story than the one you've been told. Yes, your family might have lost land, but there are reasons. Let's sit down and discuss this before more damage is done." For a moment, Crusher seemed intrigued. He glanced at the envelope in Moses's hand, but then his expression hardened once more. "I've heard your lies, Tate. Your father took advantage of my grandfather's illness to seize what wasn't his." Moses stepped closer, voice steady. "I have records showing they had a loan arrangement. Your grandfather defaulted. My father legally took the property, though I won't pretend that was fair or right, given the hardship your family was in. But this is more complicated than you think. We owe each other the truth before fists start flying." Crusher's gaze flickered with something: anger, sorrow, maybe both. He stepped forward, looming over Moses. "You show your face here again, you'll regret it. Saturday, I'm taking back what's mine." With that, he turned and stormed off, leaving Moses standing in the parking lot under the sweltering sun. Some of the bikers smirked, others looked away, perhaps uncertain. Moses felt the weight of failure heavy on his shoulders as he trudged back to his truck. His hope of diffusing the situation through conversation was slipping away. That evening, Trixie made her third visit to Moses's porch. She found him hunched in his rocking chair, staring into the distance. When he noticed her, he mustered a tired smile. "Any luck on your end?" he asked quietly. Trixie shook her head. "Crusher's not budging, but a few of us have had enough. We didn't sign up to harass an old man over something that happened half a century ago. Some of us plan to leave town soon." Moses sighed. "I tried to talk to him, but he won't listen." She knelt beside him, her face tense with concern. "You should prepare for Saturday. He's rallied every member he can. There might be violence. And Crusher, well, he's got a temper. When things go south, he doesn't hold back." Moses's heart pounded. "I won't run away from my home, but I also don't want anyone getting killed. I get that, Trixie said, standing up. Just have a plan, and if you can find a way to show him he's wrong, really show him, do it fast. The rest of the night, Moses scrambled for a solution. He reached out to Samuel again, who advised him to gather all the documentation and see if they could get an emergency injunction. But that would do little if Crusher came storming in with a mob. Moses also called Pastor Hathaway, who offered to organize a peaceful assembly on Moses's lawn. The pastor believed that the presence of many decent townsfolk might deter violence. As the dawn of Friday broke, word spread that a showdown loomed. Rumors claimed dozens of bikers from out of town were on their way to join Crusher. Some said they'd arrive armed, possibly carrying baseball bats or guns. Fear gripped Fletcher's Grove. Parents kept their children indoors, and shops closed early. Through it all, Moses kept replaying the story of Emmett Caldwell and his father, wondering if there was a missing piece that might change Crusher's perspective. And then, late Friday afternoon, a battered pickup truck rattled up Moses's driveway. An elderly white woman, stooped by age, stepped out. Her thin hair was pinned back with a clip, and her weathered hands gripped a cane. Moses opened the door, puzzled. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I sure hope so," she said with a shaky smile. "Name's Nancy." Nancy Caldwell. Emmett was my father. Moses nearly dropped the stack of papers he was holding. You're from the Caldwell family?" She nodded, her eyes sweeping over the property. "Haven't been back here in decades. Heard from a friend that some biker gang claiming the Caldwell name was causing trouble for you. Figured I'd come see what's going on." Moses invited her in, offering a glass of water. Nancy lowered herself onto a chair. Though her body was frail, her eyes were sharp and determined. "Daddy had a lot of regrets about how things went down," she began. "He was young, proud, and scared. Needed money for hospital bills. Your father offered help more than any bank would, that's for sure. But Daddy couldn't pay it back." She sipped her water, pausing to catch her breath. "I remember overhearing arguments. Daddy wanted more time. Your father wanted what was legally owed. But your father also said if Daddy could pay even half by the end of the year, he'd let us stay. Problem was, Daddy got sicker. The bills just kept piling up." Moses felt a pang of sympathy. "I wish I'd known all this sooner." Nancy nodded slowly. By the time the year ended, Daddy had nothing. He lost the land, fair and square. But he always told me and my brother that the Tates were decent folk, that they gave him every chance. He never once claimed you stole it. Moses closed his eyes, relief washing over him. So the father of the Caldwell family had never blamed the Tates for wrongdoing, at least not entirely. This contradicted everything Crusher believed. "Do you have any letters or documents that might prove your father bore no ill will?" Nancy reached into her bag, producing a tattered notebook. The edges were yellowed with age. She flipped through pages covered in neat cursive. "This is my father's journal." He wrote about what happened. In his own words, "If that gang truly cares about our family's honor, maybe this will open their eyes." Moses gingerly took the notebook from her. "Thank you. This could be the key to preventing a bloodbath." Nancy nodded, tears brimming. "I just hate to see people twisted by a false story. Daddy wouldn't want more hurt over land he'd long ago accepted he lost." As Nancy prepared to leave, Moses insisted she stay in town for her own safety. She agreed, checking into a small bed and breakfast. Moses spent the night poring over Emmett Caldwell's journal, reading page after page about the man's struggles, his gratitude toward the Tates, his acknowledgement of the debt. Emmett never once used words like cheated or stolen. Instead, he thanked Moses's father for even attempting to help in times when discrimination barred many black families from receiving fair loans. By the time Moses finished reading, dawn's light trickled through the window. Saturday had arrived, and with it, destiny. Perhaps the truth contained in that journal could prevent the unthinkable. Holding the fragile notebook close, Moses steeled himself. He prayed for courage, for wisdom, and for the chance to break the cycle of hatred before lives were lost. Saturday dawned hot and heavy with anticipation. In the early morning, a line of vehicles and motorcycles rumbled into Fletcher's Grove, stirring up dust. Word spread like wildfire. The showdown was imminent. Sheriff Parker and his deputies barricaded the main highway intersection, trying to manage the sudden influx of bikers. Tensions were razor-sharp. Meanwhile, on Moses's property, a small group of townspeople gathered, led by Pastor Hathaway. They formed a circle on the lawn, some holding hands, others standing resolute. Myrtle Evans, the grocer, carried a sign reading "Truth and Peace." A few men brought hunting rifles, intending to protect Moses if things got violent, though the pastor begged them to keep the weapons out of sight, praying cooler heads would prevail. In the midst of this, Moses stood on his front porch, his nerves taut. His heart hammered so loudly he wondered if the entire world could hear it. Next to him sat a small wooden table, the old Caldwell journal resting on top. Moses had a plan, albeit a fragile one, to confront Crusher with the truth. The presence of Nancy Caldwell, who stood nearby with the aid of her cane, gave him a measure of confidence. Shortly after noon, the roar of engines announced Crusher's arrival. He wasn't alone. Over 24 bikers fanned out behind him, most wearing vests emblazoned with skull patches. Some wore bandanas over their faces, others scowled openly at the townsfolk. A hush fell over the crowd as Crusher dismounted, his eyes burning with determination. Trixie stood off to the side, biting her lip. Sheriff Parker cleared his throat and stepped forward. "All right, everyone, let's keep this peaceful. I don't want any trouble on this property." Crusher ignored him, marching straight toward Moses's porch. He paused at the bottom of the steps, glaring up at the elderly man. "You've run out of time, Tate. This land belongs to my family. I'm taking it back." Moses raised both hands, his voice calm despite the trembling in his gut. "And I'm asking you to listen. There's someone here you need to meet." Crusher sneered. "I don't need to meet anyone. I already know the story." "No," Moses said firmly, stepping aside to reveal Nancy Caldwell. "You don't." Nancy tottered forward, leaning heavily on her cane. She locked eyes with Crusher, her expression a mix of sorrow and resolve. "Boy," she began, "you don't know me, but I'm Nancy Caldwell. Emmett Caldwell was my daddy and your grandfather, if what you say is true." Crusher's face faltered, disbelief warring with anger. "What, this some trick?" Nancy shook her head. "No trick. I've got no reason to lie. I only came here because I heard your group was stirring up trouble, claiming the Tates stole our land. My daddy never once said such a thing." She reached into her purse, producing a small photograph of younger Emmett standing outside a hospital with a patch over his left eye. This was taken shortly after one of his surgeries. "We were struggling, but the Tates offered to help. Daddy wrote about it in his journal." Moses lifted the journal, opening to a flagged page. He read aloud, his voice carrying over the hush of the crowd. "September 20, 1958. I am indebted to Mr. Tate for providing the loan that Dr. Byrne at Detroit Mercy Hospital recommended. Without this, I'd have lost my chance at treatment sooner. I only pray I can repay him. He's been fair and kind, more than any bank would be, to a colored family these days." As Moses's words resonated through the gathering, heads turned. The tension in the bikers' ranks grew palpable. Crusher's cheeks flushed. He snatched the journal from Moses, scanning the lines, jaw clenched tight. In that moment, silence stretched, brittle as glass. The congregation of townsfolk watched with bated breath, hoping the truth would sink in. Finally, Crusher snapped the book shut, voice hoarse with denial. "So maybe your father was decent at first, but in the end, he still took my granddaddy's land." Nancy nodded. "Yes, because we couldn't pay. and Daddy accepted that. He never once said the Tates stole it. He was thankful they tried to help at all. Times were different back then. We didn't have access to fair lending institutions. Your granddaddy did everything he could, but it wasn't enough. That's the tragedy. Yes, but it's not theft. Crusher's eyes darted between Nancy, Moses, and the journal. The furious certainty he'd carried for so long cracked under the weight of evidence. For years, he'd fed on a narrative of betrayal, relishing the idea of reclaiming a stolen inheritance. But now that narrative was collapsing, suddenly one of the bikers behind Crusher shouted, "She's lying, boss! They're trying to trick us." Another barked, "Don't back down, this is about family honor." Their outbursts fanned the embers of Crusher's anger. He looked torn, the scowl returning. With a snarl, he turned to Moses. Honor demands restitution. Even if it wasn't theft, it was still an injustice. My family suffered. I grew up with nothing because of what happened here. Moses felt tears prick his eyes. I'm sorry for your suffering, truly. But hurting me or destroying my home won't change that past. If there's a way to make amends, let's do it legally, peacefully. We can talk about restitution, about a monument to your grandfather, or something that honors his memory. That offer hung in the air. Some bikers lowered their gazes, uncertain. The townspeople watched, hearts pounding. Even Trixie's eyes glistened with emotion. A chance for resolution stood before them, fragile as a soap bubble, one sharp word, and it might burst. Sheriff Parker slowly approached. Crusher, you got your facts. You see that the Tates didn't steal anything. Let's stand down. We can figure out a better path forward without violence. Crusher's hand trembled as he clutched the journal. A single tear escaped down his cheek, quickly wiped away with a swipe of his leather glove. You think a little talk and a dusty old notebook can erase years of pain? He muttered. I spent my whole life believing we were robbed. Nancy reached out and touched his arm gently. I understand bitterness, boy, but holding on to it only chains you to the past. I lost my father, lost the land, and still went on living. We can't change what happened, but we can change what happens next. For an agonizing moment, it seemed Crusher might lash out again. But then he dropped his head, the fight draining from him. The circle of bikers seemed to slump in unison, their adrenaline cooling. Nobody moved. A flock of birds flew overhead, their calls echoing in the silence. Finally, Crusher spoke in a broken whisper. I don't know what to do now. Moses exhaled, shoulders sagging. We'll figure it out together. And at that, something shifted. The entire crowd seemed to release a collective breath. The tension that had threatened to ignite into violence began to diffuse. That didn't mean all was forgiven or that the wounds would vanish overnight, but the moment of potential bloodshed had passed, replaced by a fragile hope that understanding could prevail. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the biker gang, still somewhat dazed, milled around, uncertain of their next move. Sheriff Parker and his deputies gently guided them away from Moses's porch, ensuring no one acted on lingering aggression. Nancy Caldwell's presence, along with her father's journal, had shattered the long-held myth that Emmett Caldwell had been swindled. Now, new questions emerged. How did the family legend become so twisted? Who fueled the resentment that led Crusher down this path? Seeing the volatility subside, Pastor Hathaway stepped forward. All who wish to find peace are welcome inside our church, he announced. We have refreshments and a quiet space to talk. Let's come together and see if we can build a bridge instead of a wall. Some bikers scoffed at the idea, but a surprising number, exhausted from the tension and the glaring spotlight of the law, agreed to follow the pastor into town. The pastor hoped that a simple gesture of hospitality might ease frayed nerves. Meanwhile, Crusher lingered on Moses's property, turning the old journal over in his hands. "Where did you get this?" he finally asked, his tone subdued. Moses pointed to Nancy, who stood nearby, leaning on her cane. "She brought it. It belonged to your grandfather." Crusher swallowed hard. "Why now? Why didn't she come sooner?" Nancy gave a small, sad shrug. "I didn't know you even existed until a friend mentioned a biker gang raising chaos in Fletcher's Grove. My side of the family drifted away after Daddy's death. We never kept records of every cousin or grandchild. By the time I realized you were his blood, you were already on this warpath." Crusher's grip on the journal tightened. "So, everything I believed was a lie?" Nancy shook her head gently. "Not everything. Your grandfather truly was proud, and losing this land hurt him deeply. But he never blamed the Tates in the way you do. He understood the circumstances were bigger than just good guy or bad guy." Moses watched Crusher's shoulders slump under the weight of revelation. A flicker of empathy stirred inside him. "If you want to learn more about your grandfather's time here, I'll show you what I have," he offered quietly. "I'm sure we can dig up more from local archives, photos, records." Crusher gave a short nod. "Yeah, maybe." At that moment, Trixie approached, relief evident on her face. "We're standing down, right, boss? We're not doing this anymore." Crusher glanced at her, sighed, and shook his head. "No, it's over. No more threats." Trixie exhaled, clearly relieved. She turned to Moses. "I'm sorry for the part I played in scaring you. I was just following orders, but it was still wrong." Moses gave her a gentle nod. "You came forward with warnings. That took courage." "Thank you for that." Soon, Nancy excused herself, stating she needed to return to the bed and breakfast to rest. The swarm of onlookers began dispersing, and the immediate threat dissolved. Yet Moses remained outside, leaning on the railing of his porch. He could feel the storm inside him, anger at the damage done to his home, sorrow for the Caldwell family's hardship, and a wary hope that maybe, just maybe, a path to reconciliation existed. After the crowd fully cleared, Sheriff Parker approached. "I'll make an official record of today's events, Moses. The vandalism at your place, the intimidation some of these bikers might still face charges. But if they cooperate, we'll focus on restitution. Is that acceptable to you?" Moses nodded thoughtfully. "I just want peace, Sheriff. I won't stand in the way of justice. But if there's a way to turn this into something positive, let's explore it." The sheriff offered a tired smile. "Understood. I'm glad no one got hurt today." By evening, Fletcher's Grove was abuzz with talk of the confrontation and its unexpectedly peaceful resolution. At Rusty's watering hole, a small group of bikers stared into their beers, some wrestling with shame, others with residual anger. The locals eyed them warily, uncertain whether to approach with curiosity or scorn. Gradually, a few brave souls sidled over to strike up conversation, bridging the gap with cautious politeness. Crusher sat alone at a corner table. When Trixie joined him, he didn't look up. A silence stretched before he finally spoke. "All these years, I've been blaming the Tates for everything wrong in my life. Feels like the ground just got pulled out from under me." Trixie fiddled with the edge of a coaster. "I get it. We build stories in our heads to explain our pain. Sometimes it's easier to believe in a villain." Crusher's gaze was distant. "I don't know what to do now. I'm not sure who I am if I'm not the guy taking back what was stolen." Trixie placed a hand on his arm. "Maybe it's time to find out." Meanwhile, Moses wandered through his house, surveying the damage from the break-in. Broken picture frames, shattered keepsakes, overturned furniture. Each ruined item pricked his heart. Yet he also felt a strange sense of relief. The immediate threat had passed, and the truth had finally seen daylight. He paused at a framed photograph that, miraculously, remained intact. It showed his father standing proudly on the front porch, arms crossed, smiling at the camera. Moses picked it up gently. The man in the photo seemed to whisper across time, "Stand tall, keep faith." That night, Moses didn't sleep well. Emotions churned inside him: gratitude for Nancy Caldwell's timely intervention, sorrow for all the pain that had transpired, wonder at how life can change in a single day. He found himself praying not just for his own safety, but also for Crusher and the entire gang, that they might find a better path forward than hatred and violence. And though the tension had lessened, a new question loomed. Would Crusher and his men truly accept the truth? Or would the echoes of resentment drive them to cause further harm? The next steps would require cooperation and understanding from everyone involved: bikers, townspeople, and the families at the heart of this conflict. The following morning, Fletcher's Grove awoke to an unusual sight. Members of the biker gang, under Trixie's direction, were at Moses's house, quietly helping to clean up the vandalized rooms. Though some of them had participated in the destruction, their expressions now held a mix of regret and determination to make amends. Pastor Hathaway arrived with volunteers from the church, bringing cleaning supplies and plywood to board up the broken window. Moses, stepping onto his porch, rubbed his eyes in disbelief. While the damage wasn't fully repaired, seeing both bikers and townsfolk working side by side offered a rare glimmer of hope. He spotted Crusher standing near the old oak tree in the front yard, arms folded, observing the efforts but not joining in. With a sigh, Moses approached him. "It's good they're helping," he said softly. "I appreciate it." Crusher stared at the tree's gnarled bark. "Yeah, well, Trixie and some of the guys insisted. Told me it was the right thing to do." Moses followed his gaze to the tree. "This oak's been here since my grandfather planted it. Hardly any of us are alive today who remember when it was just a sapling." Crusher finally turned to Moses, eyes heavy with disillusionment. "So you and Nancy both say my grandfather never held a grudge, that he was grateful for the chance to keep his land. But the stories I heard, they were so different." Moses nodded solemnly. "Stories can grow distorted over generations, especially if they're fueled by pain and rumor. Did you ever hear these stories directly from your father?" Crusher shook his head. "Never met him. He died before I was born. I only had bits and pieces from other relatives, older folks who'd moved away. They blamed your family for everything." Moses placed a comforting hand on Crusher's shoulder, though the large man flinched slightly. "Loss and grief often look for a scapegoat. I'm sorry you carried that burden. If it means anything, I'd like to help you learn more about Emmett Caldwell's life here beyond what's in that journal. We can visit old county records, talk to folks who might remember him." Crusher inhaled, struggling to maintain composure. "Maybe that'll help me figure out what I'm supposed to do now." In that moment, Trixie waved them over, needing help lifting a fallen bookshelf. Without hesitation, Crusher and Moses joined her, working in awkward cooperation. Though no words of reconciliation passed between them, the act of laboring side by side hinted at a fragile truce. By midday, the worst of the mess was cleared. While the house still bore scars, it no longer felt like a war zone. Some bikers, rummaging through shattered furniture, found an old family photo album buried under debris. They handed it to Moses with surprising reverence. It contained decades of memories, birthdays, weddings, cookouts, precious snippets of history that nearly ended up in the trash. A hush fell as Moses flipped through the album, tears glistening in his eyes. The bikers glimpsed a life's worth of moments they had almost destroyed. One of them, a gruff man with a skull tattoo on his neck, muttered an apology before stepping outside, clearly overwhelmed. Nancy Caldwell also returned that day, carefully picking her way through the broken glass. She and Moses talked more about her father's time in Fletcher's Grove, each anecdote adding new layers to the story. Crusher listened from a distance, his expression unreadable. Later in the afternoon, as the sun beat down, Moses offered everyone glasses of iced tea on the porch. The sight was surreal, a line of leather-clad bikers sipping tea alongside churchgoers. Wariness still lingered in the air, but so did a shared sense that something transformative was happening. Sheriff Parker arrived, stepping out of his patrol car with a cautious smile. He exchanged greetings with the townsfolk, noting how the bikers were picking up trash and hauling off broken furniture. He approached Moses. "I see we've made progress here." Moses nodded. "We have, Sheriff. I'd like to formally request leniency for those who help repair the damage. They should still be accountable for any crimes, but if they're willing to make amends, I think that should be taken into consideration." Parker scratched his chin. "Fair enough. I can speak with the district attorney about that, but some restitution will likely be required." Crusher overheard the conversation and approached, clearing his throat. "I'll make sure we raise the money to cover everything that was broken, and we owe you something for the stress we caused." His words came out haltingly, as though each syllable was wrestled into submission. "I can't undo the past, but I can take responsibility." Moses managed a small smile. "That's all anyone can ask." As the day wore on, an odd sense of community began to blossom. Though many bikers said little, their actions spoke volumes. They hammered boards over broken windows, swept up glass, and sorted through salvageable items. Some townspeople ventured closer, offering help or sharing supplies. Curious children peeked from behind fences, their parents explaining why these tough-looking folks were suddenly helping Mr. Tate. By dusk, everyone was exhausted. The final trash bags were loaded into pickup beds to be taken to the dump. People gathered around Moses's porch for a makeshift potluck meal. Pastor Hathaway brought grilled chicken, while Myrtle Evans had baked cornbread. The bikers, initially hesitant, found themselves invited to partake. A few accepted with quiet gratitude. Crusher sat at the edge of the porch, eyes fixed on the horizon. Moses joined him, handing over a plate of homemade potato salad. For a moment, they ate in silence. Then Crusher spoke softly, voice laden with regret. "I was so sure I was doing the right thing, fighting for my family's honor. Now I see I was just fueling hate." Moses set his plate aside. "Hate blinds us all eventually, but you chose to see the truth when it mattered most." Crusher stared at the ground. "I nearly hurt you. Could have hurt a lot of innocent people." Moses's gaze was gentle. "Yet here we are, sharing a meal instead. That counts for something." A breeze rustled the branches of the old oak, scattering a few leaves onto the ground. The moment felt heavy with history, as though ancestors from both families were bearing witness. Perhaps in that swirl of wind, there was a whisper of forgiveness for old sins, new grudges, and the painful gap between them. Over the next week, the bikers who had once terrorized Fletcher's Grove found themselves in a peculiar position. They were still unwelcome in many corners of town, yet they'd begun forging unexpected connections. Some townspeople extended cautious hospitality, while others remained mistrustful. The local diner, Betsy's Blue Plate, began serving the bikers, though the atmosphere was tense at first. Over time, day by day, suspicion loosened its grip, replaced by reluctant curiosity. Trixie was at the forefront of this bridging effort. She'd always been more open-minded and had grown tired of living on the run. At a small town council meeting, she bravely stood up and apologized publicly for her role in the vandalism. "I can't erase what happened, but I'm willing to work for this community to make it right," she said, her voice trembling. The council members, including Sheriff Parker, considered her words carefully. Though they accepted her apology, they made it clear that actions would speak louder than words. "If you truly want forgiveness, show us," said Mayor Reed, a silver-haired woman known for her no-nonsense approach. And so Trixie organized a voluntary cleanup around town clearing debris from ditches, repainting chipped walls on community buildings, and helping with landscaping around the old schoolhouse. Many bikers joined in, wearing sweat-soaked t-shirts instead of leather jackets, pushing lawnmowers and trimming hedges. Townspeople watched from porches or passing cars, some rolling their eyes, others giving grateful nods. Trust didn't blossom overnight, but seeds were planted. Meanwhile, Moses continued his discussions with Nancy and Crusher. The trio met several times in Moses's living room, the partially repaired walls bearing fresh patches of paint. They delved into Emmett Caldwell's journal, cross-referencing the dates with local records. Each discovery shed more light on the harsh realities of the 1950s medical discrimination, the staggering cost of treatment, and the precarious financial tightrope families like the Caldwells and Tates had to walk. During one such session, Nancy recounted how her father traveled to Detroit Mercy Hospital multiple times, each journey draining their savings further. "He never once said a harsh word against your people," Nancy told Moses, her eyes shining with tears. "He only lamented the way the world worked, that he couldn't get a fair loan from a bank and had to rely on personal arrangements." Crusher listened intently, each revelation chipping away at the resentment that had festered in his heart for so long. He'd ask questions about the region's racial climate at the time, about the Tates' own struggles to keep their property safe from discrimination. Slowly, empathy replaced his anger. He no longer saw Moses as an enemy, but as a man whose ancestors also fought uphill battles in a segregated world. Despite this progress, the question of karma still loomed. How would accountability be served? Moses's home had been ransacked, and the entire town was shaken by the bikers' initial violence. Sheriff Parker filed charges against those who directly participated in the burglary. Yet Moses, in a statement to the court, argued for restorative justice. He suggested the culprits contribute to a community fund that would repair not only his home, but also other neglected properties in the area. To everyone's surprise, Crusher promised to lead that fundraising effort, using connections he'd formed over the years on the road. "Karma isn't always about punishment," Moses explained one evening, sitting in his rocking chair as the sun dipped below the horizon. "Sometimes it's about setting things right. We reap what we sow. If the bikers are willing to sow seeds of redemption, maybe they'll reap something better than prison." Crusher pondered those words. He'd always associated karma with vengeance, with payback for wrongs. But now he saw a different angle, an opportunity to transform negativity into repair for both the Tates and the Caldwells. "I'll do what I can," he promised. "But a lot of people aren't going to forgive me that easily." Moses smiled gently. "Forgiveness is a journey, not a switch." In parallel, Trixie proposed the bikers hold a charity ride for medical bills mirroring the original debt that sparked Emmett Caldwell's downfall. The idea was to partner with local hospitals, raising funds for those who couldn't afford care. She felt it would honor Emmett's memory while mending the rift that had formed in Fletcher's Grove. Word spread, and, to the gang's surprise, many townspeople expressed interest in participating or donating. Even large brands like Harley-Davidson took notice when news of the unusual reconciliation effort began circulating in nearby regions. As the days passed, the tension in the air dissolved further, replaced by a cautious optimism. The real test would be the charity event, scheduled for the following month. Would enough people trust the bikers to come together for a cause? Would the Caldwell and Tate families forge a new legacy out of old pain? One evening, Moses found Crusher sitting on the porch steps, absently rubbing his bike's handlebar. The old man joined him, gazing up at a sky sprinkled with stars. "You know," Moses said softly, "sometimes the harshest roads lead us to the most important places." Crusher grunted in half agreement. "I never expected to settle anywhere, let alone in a quiet town like this." Moses glanced at him. You thinking of staying? Crusher shrugged, the leather of his vest creaking. Don't know. My old life is all I've known. But there's something about this place, the people. Maybe I can do some good here. They fell silent, the night breeze carrying the scent of fresh paint from Moses's newly repaired walls. In the distance, crickets chirped and an owl hooted softly. For a moment, the porch felt like a portal between the old and the new, a space where grudges could be laid to rest, and new beginnings might sprout. Karma, Moses realized, was not about exacting cosmic punishment, but guiding each soul to face its own reflections. Crusher had confronted his demon, his deeply ingrained belief that his family had been robbed. Now, he had a chance to rewrite that story and perhaps help others avoid similar traps of resentment. Whether he seized that chance was up to him. The day of the charity ride dawned bright and warm. Bikers from all over the region converged on Fletcher's Grove, some curious about the unusual event that blended charity, reconciliation, and a dash of local law. Townspeople lined Main Street, holding signs like "Ride for a Cause" and "Unity, not Division." Vendors set up booths selling food, drinks, and souvenirs, with proceeds going toward the medical fund in Emmett Caldwell's name. Crusher and Trixie led the procession, engines rumbling in a steady cadence. Moses stood near the starting line, a guest of honor, alongside Nancy Caldwell. On Nancy's lap rested Emmett Caldwell's journal, now preserved in a plastic sleeve. The crowd cheered as the bikers roared past, each one sporting a small patch on their vest. C&T Memorial Ride. The event had garnered enough attention that a local news crew filmed the spectacle, capturing the remarkable turnaround from hostility to community engagement. Following the ride, participants gathered in the town square. Speeches were given, tears were shed, and donations rolled in. A representative from a nearby hospital praised the event, mentioning that the funds raised would help at least a dozen families struggling with medical bills. Perhaps most moving of all was Nancy's short address. My father fought for his life, and in doing so lost the land he loved. But he never let bitterness claim him. Today, we honor his memory by ensuring others have a fair chance at the care he couldn't afford. This is what he would have wanted. When she finished, the crowd erupted in applause, and Crusher stepped forward. Hesitant at first, he took the microphone, voice trembling with emotion. I came here believing I was a victim, that I needed revenge. Instead, I found truth and a chance to do something meaningful. For those I hurt, for those my anger terrified, I'm sorry. I can't change the past, but I promise I'll keep working to make amends in the present. The applause was more subdued this time, but it held warmth, a tentative acceptance. Trixie hugged Crusher, tears shining in her eyes. Moses nodded approvingly from the sidelines, grateful to witness the seeds of healing take root. Over the next few weeks, the bikers largely dispersed, returning to their various home bases. Some stayed in touch with Trixie, who remained in Fletcher's Grove. She'd decided to settle there, to find regular work, and to continue building bridges. A handful of bikers, including Crusher, returned occasionally to check on the ongoing project's paint jobs, repairs, and expansions of community spaces funded by the charity ride. Meanwhile, Moses's house underwent extensive restoration. The town pooled together to mend every broken window, repair the walls, and replace Moses's damaged belongings. A local craftsman even built a new wooden rocking chair, engraved with the words, "For Moses, thank you for standing strong." Each day, Moses looked around his home and saw more than just fresh paint and new furniture. He saw the tangible proof that hearts can change and that kindness can flourish in the wake of conflict. Nancy Caldwell, after spending several weeks in Fletcher's Grove, decided to move closer to town permanently. She found a small apartment near the church, grateful for the opportunity to reconnect with her father's past. With Moses's help, she donated Emmett Caldwell's journal and other family artifacts to the local historical society. "Let this serve as a testament," she said during the handover ceremony, "to the power of truth and compassion across generations." On one of Crusher's last visits, he and Moses took a quiet walk through the property. The autumn leaves had begun to turn, painting the landscape with fiery hues. The old oak tree, battered by recent storms but still standing, was a living symbol of resilience. "You sure this old tree is never going to fall?" Crusher asked, lightly touching the trunk. Moses chuckled. "It's weathered many storms, might break a few branches now and then, but its roots run deep." Crusher nodded, then reached into his vest pocket, pulling out a small envelope. "I set up a small scholarship fund in your father's name and in mine for students in the region who need help paying for medical training or health care. Figured it was a good way to honor them both." Moses's eyes widened and he gently accepted the envelope. That's more than I ever expected. Thank you." "Thank you," Crusher said, his voice shaky. "If you hadn't been willing to listen and show me those records, I'd still be on that self-destructive path." They stood in companionable silence, each man grappling with the enormity of how their lives had changed in mere weeks. Then, with a final nod, Crusher left, the roar of his motorcycle fading into the crisp air. Moses watched him go, reflecting on how destiny can twist in ways no one can predict. Fletcher's Grove would never be the same sleepy town after that summer. It had confronted fear and prejudice head-on, emerging with scars, but also newfound strength. And while the story of the Tates and the Caldwells had once been marred by misunderstanding, it now served as an example of how acknowledging painful truths could lead to unexpected unity. In the end, the calmer moment arrived, not in a blaze of bullets or vengeance, but in the gentle reckoning that forced everyone to face the ripples of their actions. Justice came in the form of accountability and reparation, yes, but also in mercy and fresh beginnings. For Moses Tate, it was a lesson that transcended any single event. Hate cannot drive out hate. He'd once heard Dr. King preach, "Only love can do that." And in Fletcher's Grove, that truth had never rang clearer. And so, an entire town witnessed a dramatic transformation, all sparked by long-buried truths and an unexpected plea for understanding. The scars left behind by anger and prejudice will never fully vanish, but Fletcher's Grove now knows that when good people stand together, healing can replace hatred and honesty can triumph over deception. What started as a standoff ended with a community bound by shared responsibility and renewed hope. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button, share it with someone who could use a dose of inspiration, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of resilience and transformation. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful narratives to life and reminds us all that no matter how dark the road may seem, compassion can light the way forward.